There is a dog that will not cross the edge of its own yard. The fence came down 2 years ago. No wire, no current. Nothing standing between that animal and the open field beyond it. It doesn't matter. Every day it walks to the exact same invisible line and turns around. No one is holding that leash anymore. No one has been for 2 years. The dog is holding it. The dog has been holding it the whole time. Sit with that for a moment, because this is not a story about a dog. This is a story about you, about a boundary you have been obeying long after the thing that built it was removed. You already know the line. You have walked up to it more times than you can count. Today, you're going to find out it was never locked. You have probably spent a long time believing your limits came from somewhere outside you, a parent's voice, an institution, a rule book you never got to write, handed to you before you were old enough to ask questions about it. But some of the strongest walls you live inside were never built by anyone else's hands. You built them. Or someone convinced you they were necessary and then walked away, and you kept maintaining the wall long after the builder was gone. That's the part that should unsettle you a little. Not that a cage exists, that you're the one still guarding it. This is not a new condition. Go back 2,000 years and you'll find a whole religious system organized around this exact confusion. People so devoted to guarding the cage that they lost sight of what it was ever supposed to protect. There's a scene from that world worth walking into, a courtroom of sorts, except the courtroom is a courtyard, and the defendant didn't do anything to deserve what's about to happen to her. A group of respected men drag a woman into public, not to help her, not to restore her, to use her as bait. It is one of the most quietly devastating scenes ever recorded, and folded inside it is a truth that explains something you have felt your whole life, whether you had language for it or not. Freedom and law were never the same thing, and when you confuse the two, you build a cage and call it holiness. That confusion has a name, and it has your fingerprints on it too. Here is what you were probably never told. Freedom, real freedom, is not the absence of a boundary. It's the ability to choose without the crushing weight of fear sitting on top of the choice. A free person doesn't act because they've calculated the consequences down to the decimal. A free person acts because they know who they are. But freedom always travels with a companion, responsibility. The moment you are free to choose, you are also entrusted with what you chose. That pairing, freedom and responsibility, is not a punishment. It's a sign of how much you were trusted with in the first place. And it's exactly the tension sitting underneath the story you're about to hear. For centuries, an entire nation lived inside a detailed legal code: what to eat, what to wear, how to worship, how to treat the poor, the stranger, the enemy. It was thorough, it was demanding, and it functioned like a chain, not to drag anyone backward, but to mark a boundary. This far, no further. Here is what that chain could never do, no matter how perfectly you kept it. It could tell you where the edges were. It could never once tell you who was standing on the other side of it, waiting for you. That is the quiet tragedy hiding inside a legal system. You could obey every line of it, publicly, faithfully, for your entire life, and still never actually know the one the law was pointing toward the whole time. You could know exactly where the boundary sat and have no relationship whatsoever with the one who drew it. The law was never meant to be a ceiling over your life. It was meant to be a floor under your feet, something to stand on while you learn to walk toward a person, not a rule book. Somewhere along the way, entire generations flipped that. They turned the floor into a ceiling. They started measuring holiness by how low they could keep the roof. Religious communities have a long history of becoming cage builders, not because they are especially corrupt, because rules are simply easier to manage than relationship. A rule is measurable. You can check whether someone kept it. A relationship isn't measurable that way. It's slower. It's messier. It costs you something rules never ask for. So the temptation, then and now, is to trade the harder thing for the easier one. Draw a line. Decide who's in and who's out. Call it righteousness. It feels orderly. It feels safe. Most of the time, what it actually is a cage wearing a robe. Which brings us to a courtyard, early one morning, and to you, though you won't recognize yourself there yet. See it, early morning, a public courtyard already filling with people who came to hear a traveling teacher speak, dust rising off the stone, sandals shuffling, an ordinary day doing what ordinary days do. Then a disruption cuts through it. A cluster of powerful men, respected, credentialed, certain of themselves, shoving a woman through the crowd. Caught, they announce, in the act of adultery. And they say it loudly, in front of everyone she has ever known, on purpose. Now stop, because this is the detail almost every telling rushes past, and it's the one you need to feel. Nobody in that crowd asks about her. Not one person wonders what season of her life led her to this moment. Not one person asks whether her marriage had already died in every way but paperwork. Not one person asks if there's a child waiting for her at home who has no idea what's about to happen to their mother. Not one person asks her name. In that courtyard, she is not a woman. She is a prop, a tool. They didn't drag her there because they cared about justice for her marriage. They dragged her there because they wanted to trap the man teaching at the center of the crowd, and she was simply the nearest available weapon. You know this feeling. Maybe not this exact scene, but this exact sensation. Being reduced to your worst moment, paraded in front of people who never asked your name either, used as evidence in an argument that was never really about you. The trap itself was brilliant in the coldest sense of the word. The ancient law was specific, death by stoning, carried out by the crowd itself. If the teacher agreed with the law, he'd be endorsing a public execution, something the Roman authorities in that region would never allow, and something that would turn the crowd against a man known for mercy. If he disagreed, he'd be discrediting the very scriptures he claimed to uphold, handing his accusers the exact line they were hoping for. He doesn't even believe his own book. Either answer destroys him. That was the design from the start. She was never the target. She was the ammunition. So they ask him, right there, in front of everyone, "The law says stone her. What do you say?" And here the story does something almost no one expects. He doesn't answer. He bends down, and he starts writing in the dirt with his finger. No speech, no counter-argument, no debate over interpretation. He simply lowers himself, the one person in that courtyard with any real authority to speak, down to the same level as the dust she is standing in. Nobody knows what he wrote. It has never mattered. What matters is what that posture did to a room full of men with stones already halfway lifted in their hands. They press him for an answer. Finally, he straightens up and says one sentence. Not a legal argument, not a loophole. A single, surgical sentence spoken directly into the center of every self-righteous certainty standing in that courtyard. Let the one without sin among you throw the first stone. Then he goes back to writing in the dirt. Watch what happens, because it should stop you cold. Nobody argues with him. Nobody says, "Well, technically my sin was a different category than hers." The text says they begin to leave, one by one, starting with the oldest. Notice that detail because it's speaking directly to you, the oldest first. The ones who had lived the longest, accumulated the most years and therefore the most evidence against themselves. Age hadn't made them more qualified to judge her. It had only given them a longer list of their own things they wouldn't want written in that dirt beside hers. One by one, the accusers disappear. No stone thrown, no verdict announced, just an empty courtyard. A woman still standing in the one spot they left her, and the teacher finally looking up to ask her the only question anyone had asked her all morning that treated her like a person instead of evidence. Where are they? Didn't even one of them condemn you? She says, no one. And he tells her, no condemnation from me either. Go, and don't return to this life. Notice the order. because it is the entire point of the story, and it is being spoken over you right now as much as it was spoken over her. He did not excuse what she'd done. He told her to leave that life behind. The weight that comes with freedom is still fully present, still hers to carry forward. But he refused to let a crowd of self-appointed cage builders turn her into a lesson. He gave her back her personhood before he ever said one word about her choices. That is what happens when someone who actually has authority meets someone the law had already sentenced. He doesn't cancel the law. He stands between you and it, and he pays attention to you first. There's a sentence spoken later that same day that names exactly what just happened in that courtyard, and it needs to land at full weight, not softened into something smaller than it actually is. Hear what that is actually saying about you. It is not calling sin a bad habit or an unfortunate lapse in judgment. It is calling it slavery, a condition, not a single action. And slavery is not something you negotiate your way out of through better behavior. You cannot outperform a chain. Someone has to break it from outside the cell because no one inside a cell has the authority to open its own door. That is the entire hinge of what happened in that courtyard. The woman was not freed because she promised to do better. She was freed because someone with actual authority refused to let the law be the last word and spoke a different word over her instead, without ever pretending the law didn't exist. That distinction gets named even more plainly in a letter written afterward, spelling out exactly what had changed for everyone standing where she once stood. This is not dismissing the law. It says the just requirement of the law was fully satisfied, not ignored, not erased, satisfied. The chain was not pretended away. It was answered by someone with standing to answer it. The law could diagnose exactly what was wrong with you. It never once had the power to heal it. It could point at the disease with perfect accuracy and never once hold the cure.
That is the real difference between a cage and a relationship, and it has always been the difference. A cage can tell you precisely where the boundaries sit. It cannot love you. It does not know your name, your history, the season of your life that brought you to where you are standing right now. Only a person can know that. This is not a theological footnote. This is a pronouncement being made over you. You were never meant to be defined by the boundary. You were meant to be known by the one who set it. Here is where this stops being a story about ancient religious officials and becomes a story about your Tuesday morning. Cage builders did not go extinct. They changed clothes. Every generation produces people, often sincere, often convinced they are protecting something sacred, who find more excitement in drawing lines than in restoring the people standing behind them. Who's in, who's out, what you cannot wear, watch, question, or struggle with and still belong. Rules invented far outside anything actually written in the text, enforced with the same false certainty as if they had been carved into a mountain. None of that was ever God's design for you. The cage was never his blueprint. It was always something people built on top of the relationship he actually wanted with you, and then mistook the cage for the relationship itself. But here is the harder truth, worth sitting with longer than feels comfortable. Not every cage has someone else's fingerprints on the bars. Some of the walls you are living inside right now, you built yourself. A memory of a failure you have refused to let go of long after the actual case would have closed. A voice in your head that still sounds exactly like the oldest man in that courtyard, accusing, calculating, stone already lifted, except now the only person standing in the circle is you. You were not made for that cage. Hear that as what it is, not a suggestion, a declaration over your life. You were not designed to live accused. You were designed to be known, restored, and sent out free. Real freedom was never only freedom from the penalty of sin. That was always just the beginning of it. The fuller freedom, the one you were actually built for, is freedom from every cage. the ones other people constructed around what God is allowed to do in your life, and the ones you constructed yourself out of guilt you were never actually asked to carry another day of. The dog in the yard does not need the fence taken down again. It's already gone. It has been gone for a long time. What it needs is to actually walk past the line and discover the field was always there waiting. The door has been open longer than you have been standing at it. The verdict was already spoken. The only remaining question is whether you keep circling a boundary that no longer exists, or whether you finally believe it and walk through into what you were always meant to become. No condemnation over you, no cage around you, just an open door, and everything on the other side of it that was always meant to be yours. 1335. Love is the